I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried, will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Jonathan Kemp, thank you so much for coming on my show.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for asking me. Greatly appreciate it.
Just your accent alone is going to attract people to listen to the show, so you already will have a warm audience.
What more could I ask for?
Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and about your book?
By all means. So actually during COVID, I decided that the greatest wealth that I had was in fact my knowledge around mental health and also neurodiversity. And the reason I sort of came to that conclusion was I've got around 50 plus years experience of managing both. With the mental health, I spent about 20 years, so actually 30 years trying to figure it out myself. And I wasn't formally diagnosed until my late 30s. And the first diagnosis was for depression. And then about a year, maybe 2 years later, I think, I was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I also have an addictive personality, and that was, for me, very apparent early on. And actually, I stopped tongue-tied. I stopped drinking and taking other things, I think when I was about 21.
Oh, that's young to figure that out. Wow.
Yeah, well, I sort of, by then, in fact, before then, I'd realized there was something seriously wrong with me and my brain, and that if I took drink or any other substances, I would cross over that very fine dividing line between sanity and insanity, and doing what I want to be doing and not doing what I want to be doing. And I was lucky. I'd been to some, they call them 12-step fellowships, of which I think Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous are some of the better known or best known. And that was the spur for me to for want of a better term, to go clean. It's been that way for over 40 years.
Did you have family pressure or societal pressure to sort of get your act together at this young age, or do you feel like there was a guidance there, even if it was misguidance, but that you picked up on it? Because it's such a young age to make that determination.
Yes, it was. It's a really good question. I'm sort of thinking back. no one guided me specifically. It was because I had this desire to work out what was wrong with me. And I'd known some people who had been in these fellowships, and they said they found it very helpful. So that was one of my port of calls on my journey of discovery. And I thought, right, if I stop, taking substances that sort of change the way I think or alter my brain, then maybe that is the solution. And if I work this program, this spiritual program, maybe that's the solution. And that, plus trying many other things, were consciously done on my behalf because I wanted to find a solution to what was going on in my brain. And I remember it's probably, certainly by the time I left school, so that was age 18, if not before, I had two really clear objectives. So one was to find peace of mind. And then the second one was to prove I wasn't stupid, because probably by the age of, 7, 8, I decided that we have an English expression, I wasn't the sharpest tack in the box. Because I had real trouble studying, I had trouble remembering things, I didn't do well in exams, and that carried all the way through to when I left school at 18. And I just put it down to the fact that, yeah, I was stupid. But again, that drove me to prove that I wasn't stupid. And actually, I got diagnosed with dyslexia in my late 40s. And then about a year or so later, it was strange. It was no big event. I just realized I didn't have to prove myself anymore.
It's kind of amazing how age can help you in that respect. Did you ever look back and go, maybe some of the things that I took or I perceived as a failing were actually gifts that I actually had?
That's a very interesting question. And the reason I'm pausing and smiling is because I'd have to, partly, for me, it's one of the features of dyslexia is somebody asks me a question, I can't sort of immediately think of the answer. It does take my brain about 2 or 3 seconds to process it.
Yeah.
And people, particularly on the telephone, some people have told me, didn't know if you were still there, if have you dropped dead, or has the phone stopped, but no, it's Jonathan thinking. I've completely forgotten the question.
This is perfect because this is exactly how our brains work.
Exactly.
It's like,
I shouldn't have got distracted.
I'll tell you this because I had this amazing therapist come on a show, and she is a stutterer herself, and she also works with people who stutter. And I had a new editor at the time, and when we put the show through editing, she cleaned up all the stuttering. And I said, no, 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 no. Leave every brain loop, leave every stutter, in every show that I do, leave it, leave it, because that's part of why we do this. People rush to speak. I do that. Like, I want to rush to speak to help someone out. And I've had to learn how to go, okay, just be quiet and give people room. It's not a sign of intelligence. Actually, I now take your pause as you're a deep thinker. You got to let this metabolize, and you're going to say something about it when you're ready. And so there's no need for me to.
She's still there.
No, I know you're still there. Okay. The question was, have you thought about, maybe during the process of the book writing, or maybe you will think about it, that some of the things that you perceived about yourself in school, I'm not bright, I'm not this or that, if actually those ways that you behaved, the way that you take things, are actually gifts that you have, but society kind of was telling you that, those were impediments.
Again, I pause. It's probably a whole 1 hour conversation in itself.
Yeah.
So in answer to the question, looking back, could I see the sort of, is there a benefit or are there positives? And there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. So if there is a positive and a benefit, it's because it's what's driven me to where I am today. So if I wasn't so driven to, prove my intelligence, I wouldn't have, done a lot of the things I did. I wouldn't have developed. I developed a note-taking technique which helps people really listen and concentrate. I certainly wouldn't have done any of that. But actually, for me now, the gift, both in terms of neurodiversity and mental health, is that it's like a sort of secret key that you've got, and you can connect with almost anyone, anywhere. Doesn't matter what background, what age, what circumstances. But once you start talking about, what I found is that when I start talking, when it's appropriate, about mental health or neurodiversity, often the other person will immediately open up about themselves, their family, their friends, their colleagues. And where this was really, really struck me, I was in Vietnam about 2 years ago. And a few people asked me what I was doing, local Vietnamese people asked me what I was doing, and I explained I was writing a memoir about my experience with mental health, and I explained a little bit about it. I must admit, I was a bit hesitant whether to say that or not, but almost without exception, they opened up about themselves, their family. One, if not two people, referred me on to someone else whose children had problems with bipolar. And so what I found, and it was really, really evident then, is that in a social situation, there's often a sort of like a glass wall you can't really see through. And consciously done, I can use my, extensive experience with both mental health and neurodiversity to build a really deep, much deeper and much more valuable and much more rewarding experience very, very fast, because I'm willing to be open and talk about these very personal things. So I think looking back and looking forwards, I would say that is the greatest gift.
I love that. And you're right. I mean, you've noticed too, haven't you? Like maybe even in the last 10 years, the discussions around mental health are so much more open than, because I remember walking in 15 years ago somewhere, let's say to get my hair cut, or anywhere where you sit down, a coffee shop, and I could mention something about mental health and there would be crickets and discomfort and silence. And then just a few years later, it started to become, now if I go in, everybody's crowding around to talk about, anxiety, ADHD, autism, bipolar disorder, whatever it is, in such an open way. And I mean, I know Americans are pretty open about talking about everything, but there still was this be quiet. And now I don't see that anymore. So I'm wondering what your experience has been around that.
Well, certainly for myself, I would say 80s, 90s, you didn't really hear about mental health. And probably, that expression, mental health, I don't think I really heard about it, certainly didn't talk about it. And the expression neurodiversity, I mean, that would have gone straight above my head. I think there was a certain amount of people willing to talk about things like addiction. But again, it wasn't that common. And people would rarely talk about therapists or psychiatrists, because therapy was some weird thing from the West Coast of America. We're British. We don't need that sort of stuff. Just swallow it and get on. And then psychiatrists were just people who, had something to do with people who had, we call them nutters or a nutcase.
Right.
And actually, funny enough, if somebody called me a nutter because I was behaving sort of a bit strangely, I actually took that as a compliment. So it's a bit like when I was a punk rocker for a couple of years. And I remember I was walking across one of the bridges of the Thames, and I had all my punk gear. I had a safety pin through my mouth, through my nose, through my ear. I was 17, 18. And there were two women with pushchairs coming towards me. And one of them looked up and went, "Oh, that is disgusting." And I was just like, "Oh, yes, bring on the gold medal. Thank you."
See, it's that little spark, that I think I know that, anybody can have that spark, and I love it. It just seems like it's a little more highly developed in the case of someone who's neurodivergent. I had that same thing, the punk out hair, Billy Idol. I had Billy Idol hair, and
Fantastic.
anybody called me weird or whatever, I was like, so
Bring it on.
while being very reserved, with what I shared. So a lot of people now are talking about, the ways that we present ourselves to the world, and that can be very, very, they talk about masking, hiding who you really are because of societal norms. So explain a little bit about what that was like for you when you were going through your hardest times with mental illness.
Yeah. So, just to sort of give a bit of elaboration about when did it become more normal to talk about mental health. I think for me, sort of leading up to COVID, people were talking about it more. I started blogging about it informally on, my LinkedIn and Facebook about 2.5, 3 years ago. And then that was a conscious decision. And I remember thinking, God, do I really want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you know what the implications can be? And then I thought, oh, shut up, Jonathan, just get on with it. And, but I think for me, the biggest change has been because of two things. Firstly, COVID, where there was a global, universal experience under extreme stress of an illness that forced us to isolate.
Mm.
And because of that, and because it was universal, every country in the world, everybody had an experience of being forced into isolation. And then the subsequent consequences of that around mental well-being and mental health. So I think that was one big game changer. And the second one is the use of social media. So it wasn't me just sitting in my place on my own. If I wanted to, I could check out Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and I could connect with anybody anywhere in the world.
Mm.
And so I could then start to communicate what I was thinking and then get feedback from others. And they were saying, oh, gosh, yes, no, this is what we're having. Or, one of my friends this is what's going on. So I think the big change, in fact, there's another feature. So I think our understanding of the brain and neuroscience seems to have leapfrogged from about 1990 onwards, and has just got better and better. And so people's understanding of how the brain works, because we understand pretty much how the rest of the body works, but the last frontier is the brain. And the more we understand about it, the more we recognize that, there are some common features, common illnesses, common difficulties, which are associated with the brain. And because we're able to do scans and all sorts of things. So for me, I think there are three things why it's become easier to talk about. It's the progression in understanding of medical understanding, progression of things like therapy and psychiatry. But also then you've got that COVID, which put everybody under the same huge stress. And then social media, which is a means to talk. And when I was in Vietnam, they actually said pre-COVID, no one talked about mental health. And professionally, I mean, I've done my own thing for a long time. Even then, I wouldn't talk about mental. I might do it very occasionally. Is someone, I was training a group of people and someone had to mention something, but it would only be in response to a specific stimuli. Now, having rabbited on about that, I can't believe this. I've completely forgotten the question. You have to remind me.
That's okay. That's okay. It was such an in-depth answer. I had to sit here and go, don't interrupt with the 17 things that you made me think of while you were talking, but that's how my neurodivergent brain works. You're good at making me go, just be still and stay present. So you know what? I don't even remember it either. So we will move on to the next question.
Perfect. It'll probably come back to me.
It probably will. Okay, let's talk about the book, the process of writing the book, and tell everyone what the name of the book is and that journey.
So I've always been driven consciously and subconsciously with the idea of accumulating wealth, being wealthy, and success. I think a lot of it comes back from my background. So I come from a very privileged traditional English background. I was expected to go to Eton, maybe Oxford, Cambridge, maybe join the army, go into the city. Eventually, as my grandfather used to remind me that, I was expected to sit in the House of Lords, debate legislation, and do good for, the local county. In the UK, we're split into counties. So I guess it's a bit like your states. And do good for, the local county and the country as a whole. And it was quite a strong Victorian mindset about all sorts of things. So my grandfather was born in the early 1900s. So his father was very much a product of the Victorian era, as was his grandfather. Sorry. And it was only about, I'm trying to think. So during COVID, I had a really rough time with mental health. I thought it'd be super easy. I thought this is going to be easy. I know what terrible feels like. I didn't use the word terrible. I know what terrible feels like. This should be super easy. And it was a nightmare because I hadn't understood the importance of just community and being around people. And so I was basically on my own. I had 3 or 4 quite substantial bipolar highs and then crashes. And I can't remember how it came about, but I spoke to a psychiatrist and he said to me, do you realize you keep talking about wealth? Or do you realize how much sort of the idea of wealth and success are driving you? And I never really thought about it, although it obviously had. And it was when I started thinking about it, I thought, actually, what is it? Because in my little soul, I'm highly competitive. And I was thinking, well, what is it really that I have now, which I could sort of redefine my wealth around? And I thought to myself, well, it's sort of 2 things. One, it's my knowledge and experience around mental health and neurodiversity. And then the other thing is around managing information. So the techniques that I developed. And then I thought, okay, well, what's success? So I'm quite happy with that concept. My wealth is this knowledge and understanding over 50 years. And then I came around to, well, what's success? And again, I thought, well, I can define my own success. and it will be to do my best to put my knowledge and experience out in the public forum to benefit others. And so for me, that was two ticks in two very separate boxes. And I wasn't prepared to write the book unless I had a period of mental stability. So after my last severe crash, this was, I think, 2021, I think it was, I went to my doctor, which was a rarity because I usually waited for about 6 months and then go, 6 months ago, I was in a really bad place. This time I went almost immediately. I was referred to a psychiatrist almost immediately. And the psychiatrist recommended I change medication. So I've been on the same antipsychosis, antidepressants for about 20 years. And in my heart of hearts, I knew they weren't working and hadn't been working for maybe 10 years. And so this psychiatrist suggested I change my medication, and I sort of made a pact with myself that, one, I'd keep an open minded and be willing. Two, I'd seek proper medical help. And three, I would do whatever they told me to do, even if I didn't want to. And so I said, okay, I'll change medications. I had a bit of a rocky road for about 4 months while things were settling in. And then sort of August time, maybe, end of August, September. So about 9 months late, 8-9 months later, it was like a miracle. It wasn't an effort to think. It wasn't an effort to breathe. It wasn't an effort to live. I could just walk along the streets. I felt comfortable. I had no sort of interference in the brain. It was like a complete miracle. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I'm going to write this book. And actually, when I was in Vietnam, so one of the things I have bipolar disorder type 2, which means that I'm really lucky. I don't have type 1. So when I go high, I don't go into sort of full-blown mania, where you're thinking about, you're hearing voices, you believe you're someone else, you believe that there's an imaginary world around you that exists. Fortunately, I don't have that experience. I'm bipolar disorder type 2, where you have hypermania. So you go right up and sort of hover on that line, that sort of crossover point, and then I'll stay there. I mean, the sort of stuff I do, it isn't rational, and I usually take big risks, particularly with money. And then at some point, the stress will become so much that I'll crash. And it was just like absolute miracle. So I went to Vietnam, and for the first 4 weeks, I just filled my time. I was sort of seeing people in the evening. I was seeing people in the day. I was going on tours. I had 4 days of language lessons. I did 2 days of cooking. And by the end of 4 weeks, I could hardly sit. I was exhausted. And I thought, actually, I was in the south of Vietnam at this point. I'm just going to go into a local coffee shop, go to the same place every day, and I'm going to start this book. And the challenge I have with writing a book is because of the neurodiversity. So having dyslexia still lodged in my brain is that if I try and write something florid, like sort of, I don't know, flowery language, evocative language, I've got more chance of walking through that wall behind me than I have of doing that. And also it makes me feel really uncomfortable. And then the other fear I have is that nobody will understand what I write. So how I got around that was, or both of those, I just decided to write as I speak. So I figured, people seem to understand when I'm talking. I mean, I do get things mixed up, and, as you've witnessed, my short-term memory isn't good.
It's part of the charm, I'm telling you.
Exactly.
It really does draw people in. I think that we're figuring that out now. I'm seeing the world kind of move to authenticity, and that includes mistakes because it draws people in. Oh, I'm listening to a human. Got it.
Yes. And I think that comes back to this idea of when things are settled, of it being a bit of a superpower, because it enables you to have this really deep connection really fast. And so what I did, I used my note-taking technique, Smart Wisdom, to sort of do out a quick plan of what I was going to say. And I've used or developed lots of wraparound strategies to help me manage the dyslexia. And so one of them is whether I'm reading or I'm writing something or I'm learning, I start with the easiest, the quickest, easiest, quickest, most interesting, and just keep doing that and keep chipping away. And so I think I started with, my trip to Vietnam, actually, because that was all fresh in my mind. And then I just sort of gradually chipped away. And then as I was writing, I thought, actually, the real value I can bring is my analysis of what works and doesn't work, because I spent 30 years trying to sort this out myself, particularly in terms of mental health, whether it's through exercise, eating, making money, losing money, I hasten to add, doing well at my job, going to university, speaking foreign languages, going to a different place to live. All of these things I thought at some point might help me or might be the answer. And also I had a lot of the reservations that I think a lot of people have, around seeing, a lot of reservations, but probably a lot of brain talk around getting help. So for me, if I went to see a doctor or a therapist at the outset, I considered it a weakness. Mm-hmm. I considered it as an admission of failure. And that if I needed to see a doctor or, God forbid, a therapist, or even worse, a psychiatrist, it meant that I was a bit, cuckoo, a bit loony. But I don't apply any of that to the rest of my body. I was applying one rule for my brain, but for the rest of my body, whether it's my eyes, so things around my brain, my ears, my throat, my eyes, at some point I would go and see a doctor, and I wouldn't see it as a matter of defeat or as a humbling experience going to get help. But for some reason with the brain, probably the most complex part of my body, I had this misconception, or deeply embedded misconception, that I should be able to think myself better. But I don't apply it if I break my leg. I don't apply it if I twist my ankle. I don't apply it. I got bleeding in one of my eyes because of the stress I was putting myself under at one point. I went to see an eye doctor. So I thought, okay, I'll actually include like sections, so questions and answers. So what were the questions, or what were the thoughts going through my head that stopped me from progressing? One of them was, well, seeing a doctor is a weakness. And then I'd put what I thought then, and then I'd put what I thought now, which is what I've just described. It's the most natural thing in the world. It's a part of your body, it just happens to be your brain, which is causing you problems. So go and see a specialist who understands the brain. And then I sort of edited the book 5 times, I think, using software. Well, I now know it to be AI assisted software for grammar and for spelling. I then sent it to 2 editors, different editors, a male editor, a female editor. I then had a sensitivity check done. So again, this is, even if I want not to do this, my inclination, and it's sort of closely linked with the hypermania of bipolar, I can never seem to do anything by half. And my idea of half is usually someone's idea of a whole or times 2. Then I had sensitivity check done, and when all that was done, I then had a final proofreading. So in the end, it took 2 years from start to finish. And still, when I got some advanced reader copies done, and I was hesitant. I thought, I don't know. People think, is there going to be blowback? I said, oh, John, just get on with it. You know, what is. And so I sort of put those fears to one side, because in the book I put one or two, I hadn't included everything. So some things weren't appropriate. I hadn't talked about members of my family because they're all very private people. So I made sure I wasn't dragging other people in.
Right.
And I was also super keen for it not to be like a sort of misery journey. So with all the editors, I said, please, can you make sure there's no self-pity, no resentment? And so and then I got a professional to do the cover and everything. And so it will be actually going out for sale formally on the 10th of October. And then that sort of brought up another thing for me, because I would like to promote the book, but then I don't want to feel uneasy that people think I'm just doing it for the money or something.
Right.
So this is the book here, by the way. And actually that picture is quite prophetic, which I'll tell you about in a second. So what I'm doing is, for the first year, all profits from the book go towards some mental health charities. And so actually that makes me feel more comfortable, because as an entrepreneur, I'm used to, banging the drum. And if I'm banging the drum and there's no direct financial gain for me, I feel more comfortable about that. I'm talking about it on podcasts like this. The other thing I decided to do, because I talked quite a bit about, developing this note-taking technique, smart wisdom. And again, I didn't want people to think, well, I'm just trying to, do an onward sell of smart wisdom courses, which historically I might have done. So what I've decided to do, and I'd actually decided anyway, because, my second wealth of experience is my knowledge around managing information, smart wisdom, et cetera, and helping students and professionals. So I decided that after the book and promoting the book for a few years, I will focus entirely on giving smart wisdom away for free. And I thought, well, actually, why don't I start now? Because I know it really helps people who are neurodivergent. It also really helps people who are struggling, with listening, concentrating, trying to understand new things. It's transformational. So what I did was, there's a short chapter just describing smart wisdom, although I mentioned it a few times. And at the end of that chapter, there is a code to which, if people use, they can then access the online smart wisdom training for free. So the book comes out in early October. And then what I decided to do, so there was that two sort of core things. One was the wealth and success. And success was, like the old me, it might have been trying to sell, 10,000 or 100,000 books or something. And that is just a surefire way of giving myself a really, really hard time. So I decided this more open-ended, just to do my best to put my knowledge and experience in the public sphere. And so what I've decided, and I did wake up this morning, I mentioned to you before, thinking, God, what are you doing, John? This is mad. But anyway, I've decided that I'm going to do a walk, 7-month walk. And it's going to be through the whole of England. So from the north of Scotland, Shetland Islands, down through Scotland, down through England. In England, I'm going to follow a route that my great-grandmother did in 1913 over 6 weeks. She was a suffragist, and she marched from the north of England down to London over a 6-week period. So I'm going to replicate that, then down to the south of England, up through Wales, and then across, and then around the length of Ireland from north to south. And all money raised, again, will go towards a number of mental health charities. But during that time, I will, just do what I do normally. I'll pop into coffee shops, probably give some books to libraries. I'll probably interview strangers about mental health, and again, put all that up on social media with the objective of just encouraging people to talk about mental health. It's as normal as talking about a sprained ankle and how do you fix a sprained ankle.
I love that. I love that. It is an interesting journey when you share of yourself in that way. And I like that you looked for your own sort of gotchas. I have the same thing in some ways where um I wrote a book about ADHD and autism and my journey there, and I have this whole platform that I could easily advertise that book. And I have a PR person and all of these things related to my podcast and my podcast network. And yet I decided to write it under a pen name. And I was like, well, what is that about? Is that shame? No, I felt so creatively free because of all of the projections that I have felt coming at me from having this platform. And I'm not discounting that or saying that's bad. I wanted this particular thing to be nothing to do with any kind of a projection, just my thoughts, my voice, my journey. And I'm so glad, that I did that. It did so much for me. I don't care if 3 people read it, I mean, I'll write other things as my real name, but this was really awesome to just go through the whole journey of it. So, and to not be tied to, well, how many books are going to sell? Who's going to leave a review? Da, 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 da. I'm on the receiving end of people wanting that because I interview authors and speakers and so on. So I don't know. It was just very psychologically interesting for me to go, this one thing needs to not have my ego out front and center. I don't want that projection of me to walk in a room before I do. Does that make sense?
Complete. Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like we've done a similar thing, but in slightly different ways. There's the word that was sort of springing to mind as you were describing why you did what you did. It gives a purity to what you're doing, and that purity has I think almost like an impetus of itself that, okay, I haven't got any ulterior motives here. I'm not trying to, sell something or force people to think anything. I'm just doing it because I believe this is good. I'm going to put it out there. What happens, happens. But I want to dispel in people's minds that I'm doing this for some sort of ulterior motive.
Exactly. Look at me. Oh, look at me writing about my journey. No, and not that there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just for me, there was just enough shred of ego still hanging around from distorted thinking of my own trauma, my own journey, that I just wanted to make sure, am I mature enough now at 55 years old to put all of that aside and just do this thing? And actually, it helped me reclaim the child part of me that I had abandoned because of abuse and things like that, where my voice got really taken from me as a child. This was a way for me to go back and get her and go, I did not forget you. So that's been amazing and part of this journey. So I'm really happy to hear you so thoughtful about this. That's what's so great, is how thoughtful you are about this whole journey, and the way that you're taking it forward is going to help so many people. We talked about that the last time, that you just walk out as you, a British male, a British Caucasian male with your background, and already before you even open your mouth to speak about what you're there to speak about, you say volumes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, after our last chat, I was thinking about that, and I think that is another of my advantages and superpower, for want of a better word, but another of my sort of advantages is time and place. So I am, 64. I come from a very privileged, very British background. I've sort of seen some of the things that you only see on televisions, but I also I've seen the flip side. So I worked on building sites, worked as a cowboy in Australia, trained as a bricklayer. I was a police officer for 12 years, so I'm very comfortable just meeting and chatting with people wherever they come from, and I can sort of adapt accordingly. So the fact that I am the age I am, the fact that I've got all this knowledge and experience, actually, it's the right time and the right place, if that makes sense.
Totally. It makes so much sense. I'm so happy that you're doing this. I'm so happy that I got to interview you. Thank you for taking the time. Oh, well, where can people find out more about your work? Where could they donate to your mission, which I know can be tough to say, but we know it's going to where it's going to. But where can people find out more about you?
So I haven't really talked about the walk yet.
Oh, yes, go ahead. Yes, we'll do that.
Um, so what I'm doing is 10th of October, the book will be published. And by then, I should have a new website purely for just about myself and, my experience with mental health, about the book. And on that website, I'll also put about the walk as well. And so that website's going to be jonathankemp.com. But if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook, if they look up Jonathan Kemp, and if I don't come up immediately, if you put in Jonathan Kemp London, that should do the trick. And so over the next few months, I'll start posting about the book. And then once the book's launched, I'm then going to start talking about the walk. And my plan is any book sales for the first year go towards mental health charities. And also any talks that I do, so any corporate talks that I do, which are paid for, that money will also go equally divided between a number of mental health charities. I think it is really important that if someone thinks something's not right, so, it could be if every day is an effort, or if you feel, disconnected from other people, or if you just sense there's something different, I would highly recommend that you don't do what I did, which is spend 20 to 30 years trying to figure it out and yourself, and trying to think yourself better, trying to, do radical exercise regimes, eating regimes, because we wouldn't do any of that again if we had a problem with our knee or our eyes or our ears. So I would earnestly recommend seeking, if you can, if you have the facility to do so, but professional medical help. And if that's difficult, just maybe talking with friends, because almost certainly there will be people who may feel similar in some sort of way. And also there are, looking at charities. So one of the charities we have in the UK is called Mind, MIND. And they have a lot of resources and also a lot of leaflets on different mental and neurodiverse conditions. That's a good point. I need to have a look at that. But, within the US, I'm sure there'll be, a lot of charities, either statewide or countrywide, who help people with both mental health and neurodiversity. And in sort of the final thing is, there is hope. I know at times, when when, particularly bipolar crashes, they are ruthless. And you think it's never, ever going to end. And you don't know. I mean, literally, you're just sort of thinking, can I walk to the edge of my sofa? Can I walk out of the door? But I think for a lot of us, I couldn't say everyone, but I think for a lot of us, there is hope. And the first step is to ask for help, but ask for help in the right place, which is with medical practitioners.
Absolutely. Jonathan Kemp, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I can't wait to see your book out there and to follow your walking tour. I wish I could be on the sidelines cheering you on, but I'll do that from here in America.
Very sensible.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
And thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio with our guest, Jonathan Kemp.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin Sinanta-Walker, and thank you for listening.
Me tonight, and I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.